Hey, it's Shane with GotRom.com. I want to make a video about hip internal rotation and 3 really important exercises for restoring hip internal rotation. So I get a ton of emails about people who are just completely missing hip internal rotation. You can do this test to see where you're at. You can lay on your back with your hips at 90 degrees and then just kind of rotate your legs internally. This is hip internal rotation. From this angle, you're here, and you rotate like that. A lot of people will go and it won't move at all. They'll have one side that just is completely stuck. So if that's you, and you've looked on YouTube and tried out all these different exercises, I want to introduce something new to you today. This is the hip stick. This is a tool that I created and just released recently, which I think is one of the big missing pieces of the puzzle for hip internal rotation. And why that is because I think that the attachment point of your adductors are a big limiting factor in that rotation ability, and especially in people with FAI and hip impingement, they get really gunked up in those adductors, and you can get in there with a foam roller, with a kettlebell, a lacrosse ball, and things like that. But this is a little bit more pinpoint, and it gets the attachment points, and it gets the interface between the adductors and the hamstrings. They get kind of glued together, and so I'm going to show you how to use this thing. So you're going to lay on your side, put this end directly into the attachment point of your adductors here, and try to get this other end as far up into the groin as possible, and then bring this leg up and over the top. I've got my hand on here for support so I can kind of steer it around, up and over the top, and right now it's just kind of like if a manual therapist is working on you and they had their thumbs in there, it's pretty darn painful. So what you do is you're here in this position, and then you can use this end of the stick to kind of steer it around and find the angle that you want. And then once you kind of got an ugly, gnarly, junky spot, you can just do some pelvic motion. So I'm going to arch my back and stick my butt out, or I'm going to tuck my tail and round my back. These are kind of subtle motions, but basically I'm moving my pelvis around, or I can move my knee around, or I can just breathe and become dead weight. So there's no real wrong way to do this exercise. You just want to get into the attachment points of the adductors, spend 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes there, and then retest that kind of hip internal rotation and see what you got on each side. I think that'll be really helpful. The other exercise is one that I've talked about before, but it's worth repeating. It's the band hip capsule mobilization. So I'll splice in a video here and you can watch that one. Hip capsule mobilization. So this can feel like a glute stretch, and you might be stretching the glutes, but you also might be getting a little bit of the hip capsule, which can really restrict your range of motion. It's whatever's nearest the joint can restrict it the most. So if you get the capsule or the tissues that are nearest the joint freed up and a little looser, you can experience all kinds of gains in your hip range of motion. So what you do, hook a band up right here, step through it, hook it around your hip crease, get something soft underneath your knee here, and get some tension on the band by walking forward. Swing your leg across into external rotation and get all of your weight balanced on your knee here. Get your torso forward very far, and then stick your butt out and drop your chest down, maybe even coming to your elbows, and you should feel a deep pressure in the back of the hip. If you feel an impingement on the front, maybe you need to use your hand to push backwards a little bit more, or you need to change your torso angle or hunt around for different positions to where you only are getting just a very deep pressure in the back of the hip. So I've been doing this for several years, so it looks like easy for me to move in and out of these positions because I'm familiar with them, but go very slow when you're doing this for the first time so you can pay attention to what is the sensation you're feeling here. The sensation you're looking for is that deep pressure in the back of the hip. So hunt around a little bit with your leg in external rotation, and you can try it in internal rotation, and it's helpful to have something blocking your leg into internal rotation like this. Meaning I'm here, internal rotation of the hip, this blocks it so it stays in that position, and then all the same things still apply. Hunt around, searching for that deep pressure, almost like a deep capsule stretch. Breathe and relax. Another thing we're doing here is we are centrating or centering the hip in the socket, and whenever the hip is centrated in the socket, it has more range of motion and more stability. So both internal and external rotation of the hip with the band is an excellent exercise, as long as there's no impingement feeling. The next exercise is actually a strengthening exercise. It's for your core. If you are someone who lifts weights or is an athlete, if your pelvis is in the improper position, say excessively anteriorly tilted, then you're not going to have very much internal rotation. You can test this in yourself by, again, going into this position and putting yourself in an anterior tilt and then trying to test your internal rotation, or going neutral or posterior tilt and testing. And you can see the difference from here. If I'm anteriorly tilted, this is my internal rotation, not a whole lot. If I go neutral, I got a little bit more. If I go posterior, I can go a little bit more. So you can also notice that when you squat, for example, if you squat with a arch in your back, you're not going to have as much rotation in your hips as opposed to when you go neutral. So how do you train having a very refined sense of where your pelvis is in space? I like these progressions for your core. Single leg dead bugs, followed by double leg dead bugs. So this is single leg, double leg, out farther into hollow body lowers, and into hollow body rocks. So I'll go a little bit slower through that. First things first is, what is neutral pelvis? If you can slip your hands underneath your back, you're in an anterior pelvic tilt. So we want to get our back flat to the ground, like you're smushing a rose petal against the ground. And then from there, you pick your legs up, smush the rose petal, tap one heel. You can keep your hands here to feel your core kind of activating. Tap like this. You can do 10 reps on each side. The next progression, which might be a couple weeks later, is double leg. Tap like this without falling into an arch. So no big arch here. So you're nice and stable, touching. To progress this, you go farther out with your heels, touching, until your legs are all the way straight. The next progression is the hollow body lowers, which is you reach up, keep this back smushed into the ground, rib cage down towards the pelvis, and open up like this. Arms straight behind the ears, toes pointed. And then the last progression is a little more dynamic, little rocks, little tiny rocks without clunk, clunk, clunk. That means you've dropped into an arch if you start clunking against the ground. It should be like a bowl on its back, gently rocking back and forth. So that's the final progression, hollow body rocks. And what that does is it teaches you how to keep a good rib cage down, neutral pelvic position, which you want to be in when you're lunging, squatting, deadlifting, lifting weights, and it'll give you more hip internal rotation versus what most people are in, which is that excessive anterior pelvic tilt, which will limit their hip internal rotation. So training the motor control of your core and your pelvis is one of the key exercises for restoring hip internal rotation, in addition to the video that I linked in here and this new tool. So give all three of those exercises and progressions a shot. See if it helps your hip internal rotation. Yeah.